When we think of the Beatles, we often focus on the Fab Four themselves, John, Paul, George, and Ringo. But there was another George who played an instrumental role in shaping their sound and turning them into the legendary band we know today, George Martin, the fifth Beatle. Martin was a classically trained musician and producer at EMI Parlophone Records when he first met the Beatles in 1962. Little did he know that this cheeky young band from Liverpool would go on to change music forever, and that he would be an essential part of that journey. What set George Martin apart was his incredible musical knowledge and studio expertise. He took the Beatles under his wing and taught them about song structure, arrangements, and how to use the recording studio as an instrument in itself. As Paul McCartney put it, George Martin was quite experimental for who he was, a grown-up. Martin's classical background allowed him to compose stunning string arrangements like the lush, soaring strings that transformed Yesterday from a simple acoustic ballad into a timeless classic. When they recorded the string quartet at Abbey Road, McCartney was so thrilled with how it turned out that he went around telling people about it for weeks. But Martin's contributions went far beyond just arranging. He was a master at translating the Beatles' boundary-pushing ideas into reality. Take In My Life from 1965. Martin composed a Bach-inspired piano solo for the bridge, but couldn't play it fast enough himself, so he recorded it at half speed, an octave lower, making it sound sped up on the record. This kind of studio trickery was incredibly innovative for the time. Or look at Strawberry Fields Forever, where the Beatles wanted to combine two drastically different versions of the song. Martin and engineer Geoff Emerick pioneered a technique called crossfading, gradually speeding up one take and slowing down the other until they seamlessly merged together. Add in the reverse-recorded instrumentation and tape loops, and you have a psychedelic masterpiece that pushed the limits of what a recording studio could do. Indeed, Martin was instrumental in fostering the Beatles' spirit of experimentation in the studio, even if he didn't always understand their unorthodox ideas at first. He was open-minded and encouraging. He brought in orchestral instruments to use in completely new contexts, like the dramatic strings in Eleanor Rigby and the circus-like brass in Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite. Under Martin's guidance, the Beatles pioneered studio techniques that are now staples of modern record production: sampling, artificial double tracking, heavy compression, and so on. They showed the world that the recording studio wasn't just a place to capture a live performance, it was an instrument to be played in its own right. But perhaps George Martin's greatest gift was his ability to get the very best out of each Beatle. He was emotionally attuned to them and could sense what they needed in the studio. He was a diplomatic mediator during tense recording sessions, especially as relationships started to fray in the later years. As George Harrison put it, George Martin was very good at translating our feelings and thoughts into music terms. In the end, George Martin's work with the Beatles didn't just change the course of the band's career, it revolutionized the entire landscape of popular music. His musical arrangements became an integral part of the Beatles' sound, and his innovative production techniques set a new standard for what could be achieved in the recording studio. The Beatles' recordings under Martin have influenced countless artists and producers in the decades since. George Martin was more than just a producer. He was a true collaborator and creative partner for the Beatles. His musical genius, studio innovations, and personal guidance were all essential ingredients in the band's groundbreaking recordings that continue to awe and inspire us over half a century later. Yes, in many ways, George Martin was the fifth Beatle, the hidden hand behind the curtain who helped four lads from Liverpool turn into the most influential band of all time. His work with the Beatles redefined what a record producer could be and set a benchmark that the entire music industry is still chasing to this day. George Martin was one of a kind, a maestro behind the mixing desk and an architect of the Beatles' sound, and that is why he will always be remembered as one of the most important figures in music history.
The first part of the song, Day in the Life, was John's, but it was incomplete. He went to Paul and said, "Have you got anything to pad it out in the middle?" Paul had another song which he was working on, which really had no connection with A Day in the Life, but it was good. So John said, "Well, let's shove it in the middle and see if we can't connect them up in some way." We connected them with a series of empty bars on either side of Paul's section before we came back into John's as a reprise. And we knew we had to fill those bars with something sensational, and we didn't know what it was going to be yet.